We didn't just find tunnels, we found a city underground. March 22nd, 1969, northwest of Kuche. I was Captain James Walker, commanding an American infantry company. According to intelligence briefings, this area was supposed to contain a simple tunnel network, hiding spots, escape routes, nothing more. We had cleared similar areas before. That morning, after nearly 2 hours of preparatory artillery fire from a nearby fire support base, my company moved in. I had roughly 112 men, two M60 machine guns, a 60mm mortar team, and artillery on standby through the radio. On paper, it was a routine sweep and clear operation. That illusion collapsed the moment one of my soldiers called me over. Beneath a layer of dirt and dry leaves was not a small spider hole, but a carefully concealed entrance. A sloping earthen stairway descended underground at a steady angle, reinforced and deliberately shaped. This wasn't something dug in a hurry. Right then, I understood this was not a temporary shelter. It was construction. We called forward the tunnel team. 3 men, light gear, no body armor, pistols, flashlights, rope. They stood over the entrance in silence, staring down. None of us said it out loud, but we all felt it. Whatever was down there was different. The first man descended and reported back through the line. "Sir, it's wide. I can crouch. Wide enough to move comfortably." That single sentence sent a chill through me. 15 minutes later came the next report, and it made the command post go quiet. "Sir, there's a medical room down here. Not a makeshift aid station. Not a shallow pit for wounded fighters. A medical clinic. Wooden tables, shelves, bandages and bottles, signs of a small surgical setup. Everything made from earth, wood, and bamboo, but organized like a functioning treatment facility. I had always believed that collapsing enough tunnels would eventually break their ability to fight. That clinic told me the opposite. They were prepared for sustained casualties, for a long war. Then there was the smell. Not gunpowder, not damp soil, food. Underground, they had built a kitchen, a concealed cooking system that redirected smoke far away through hidden vents. Blackened aluminum pots, carefully sealed sacks of rice, a ventilation network so effective that none of it was detectable from the surface. That was when the real strategy became clear to me. They didn't need to hold the ground above us every day. They only needed to survive longer than we did. The final discovery forced me to rewrite every assumption I had. A meeting room, small but deliberate, enough space for 8 or 10 people. On the earthen walls were hand-drawn maps, unit markings, arrows, movement routes, timelines. They weren't just hiding underground, they were directing the war from there. As I studied those maps, one bitter truth settled in. We thought we were advancing into their territory. In reality, we were walking on the roof of their world. What followed changed how I understood control. On the surface, we held everything. Perimeter security, observation posts, claymores out, night illumination ready. We could call artillery within minutes, air support within the hour. By every metric taught at the infantry school, the area was secure. Underground, none of that mattered. As the tunnel team pushed deeper, the reports kept coming. The system branched repeatedly, not randomly, but with intent. Narrow choke points that forced a man to crawl single file. Wider chambers positioned just far enough apart to absorb shock from demolitions. Vertical shafts that connected levels like a buried ant colony. They had thought about blast pressure, about collapse patterns, about how Americans preferred to move. One soldier described it perfectly when he came back up, his voice flat and exhausted. "It's like they studied us." There were sleeping areas underground, simple platforms carved into the dirt, arranged in rows. Not panic shelters. Barracks. Each space was small, but there were many of them, enough to house dozens of fighters at a time. That explained something we had never been able to solve. We would sweep an area, find almost no resistance, declare it cleared. Then, days later, units would take fire from the same ground as if we had never been there at all. We assumed they were slipping back in from outside. They hadn't left, they had just gone deeper. As a commander, the hardest part was knowing that destruction didn't equal denial. We could collapse sections of tunnel, but the system had redundancy. Alternate routes, emergency exits hidden hundreds of meters away. Every charge we placed felt like punching water. By late afternoon, I had to make a decision. Do we commit more men underground and risk casualties we couldn't extract easily? Or do we seal what we can, mark the location, and move on, knowing full well it would be used again once we left. The manuals didn't help. There was no doctrine for fighting an enemy who lived beneath you. We set demolition charges in the main chambers we could access, timed fuses, controlled withdrawals. The ground shook, dust rising through the jungle floor in small, unnatural breaths. When it was over, the entrance was gone, collapsed, buried. On the radio, higher command called it a success. I stood there looking at disturbed soil and didn't feel like we had won anything, because I knew what we hadn't destroyed. We hadn't destroyed their ability to think long term. We hadn't destroyed their patience. We hadn't destroyed the world they had built below the reach of our firepower. As we pulled out at dusk, I kept imagining men already moving through untouched sections of tunnel, listening to our footsteps fade, waiting for the ground to belong to them again. That was the day I realized the war wasn't being fought for villages or hills. It was being fought for time. And underground, time was on their side. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of enemy fire, not because of alarms or probes against the wire. The perimeter stayed quiet, almost unnaturally so. The jungle around us felt like it was holding its breath. What kept me awake was the realization that silence didn't mean absence anymore. Every training instinct I had was built around visibility. If you could see the enemy, you could fix them. If you could fix them, you could destroy them. That logic had carried me through every operation up to that point. The tunnels shattered it. Down there, they didn't need to move when we moved. They didn't need to react when we advanced. They could wait. They could listen. They could decide when the fight would begin and when it would end. The next morning, patrols reported signs we couldn't explain. Fresh footprints near areas we had sealed the day before. A booby trap discovered along a trail we had just cleared. A single rifle shot at extreme range, perfectly timed to remind us that someone was still watching. No engagement, no follow-up, just a message. I gathered my platoon leaders and we went over the maps again. We marked suspected tunnel exits, estimated depth, tried to predict where the system might run. It felt like guessing the layout of a city by listening to footsteps through a ceiling. One of my sergeants finally said what we were all thinking. "Sir, they don't have to beat us. They just have to outlast us." He was right. We rotated out 2 weeks later, another unit replaced us. Same briefing, same confidence, same belief that this time, with enough firepower and enough time, the area could be controlled. I wanted to warn them, but there was no clean way to do it without sounding defeated. How do you explain that the enemy has built a world you can't reach and that every victory on the surface is temporary by design? Years later, when I look back on that operation, I don't remember body counts or coordinates. I remember standing on solid ground and realizing it wasn't solid at all. The tunnels weren't just defensive works, they were a strategy. They allowed an outgunned force to absorb pressure, avoid decisive battles, and choose the moment of contact. They turned our strength, mobility, firepower, speed into something blunt and impatient. We came in fast, we hit hard, we left. They stayed. If there's one lesson I carried out of that place, it's this. You can measure territory in miles. You can measure success in reports. But when your enemy controls the space you can't see, you're never really in command. You're just passing through. The last thing that stayed with me wasn't fear. It was humility. We flew out of the area the same way we always did, boots caked with red earth, rifles slung, radios crackling with the next assignment. On paper, the operation was logged as another disruption of enemy infrastructure. Tunnels located, facilities destroyed, area temporarily denied. That word, temporarily, meant nothing to us at the time. Only later did I understand it was the most honest part of the report. Months after Kuchi, I saw the same pattern repeat itself in different provinces. Different terrain, same result. We would push in, apply overwhelming force, dismantle what we could see, and declare progress. Then the ground would go quiet. Too quiet. And when we left, the war resumed as if we'd never been there. The enemy didn't measure success the way we did. They didn't need territory in the conventional sense. They didn't need visible control. What they needed was continuity, the ability to operate tomorrow and the day after that, regardless of what happened today. The underground gave them that. A place to treat their wounded while we evacuated ours. A place to cook while we burned villages above. A place to plan while we reacted. Looking back, I realized those tunnels weren't just engineering feats. They were psychological weapons. They forced us to fight an enemy we couldn't pin down in a space where our advantages dissolved the moment we stepped off the surface. Even now, when people ask me what made Vietnam different, I don't talk about politics or strategy at the national level. I talk about that first stairway going down into the dirt, about the clinic, the kitchen, the meeting room, about the realization that the war didn't end where the sunlight stopped. We thought we were fighting men. In places like Cu Chi, we were fighting a system, one that lived underground, breathed patience, and understood something we learned too late. If you build a war beneath the earth, you don't have to win battles. You just have to survive them. After the war, people asked me what victory looked like. I never had a good answer. Because when I think back to Cu Chi, to those tunnels with their clinics and kitchens and meeting rooms, I don't see a battlefield frozen in time. I see a lesson we didn't want to learn while it was happening. We were trained to seize ground, to dominate terrain, to measure progress by what changed after we arrived. But underground, nothing needed to change for them. Their strength was not in what they took, but in what they preserved. Continuity. Those tunnels allowed them to absorb loss without collapse. A wounded fighter didn't leave the battlefield, he went downstairs. A unit didn't retreat, it dispersed into earth. Command didn't break under pressure, it simply moved a few meters deeper. For us, war was movement. For them, war was endurance. That difference shaped everything. Years later, when I walk through museums or see photographs of collapsed tunnel entrances, I notice how people linger for a moment and then move on. It looks primitive at first glance. Dirt walls, crude supports, no steel, no concrete. What those images don't show is the discipline it took to live that way, to fight without comfort, without light, without certainty, to build a functioning society beneath constant threat, knowing the ground above you could erupt at any moment. That takes a kind of resolve firepower can't erase. If I'm honest, the tunnels didn't make me doubt our soldiers. They made me doubt the idea that superior force alone decides wars. They taught me that an enemy who can disappear, adapt, and endure can turn time itself into a weapon. We left Vietnam believing we had destroyed countless tunnel systems, but the truth is simpler and harder to accept. We destroyed entrances, we collapsed chambers, we disrupted operations. What we never destroyed was the logic behind them. As long as there were men willing to live underground, to organize there, to heal there, and to plan there, the war could continue, quietly, patiently, beneath our boots. That's what those tunnels were in the end. Not hiding places, not traps, but proof that a war doesn't have to be visible to be alive.